Hi, it's time for an intercom video. What we have here today is a NuTone NM200, and this video is for Amy, and Amy lives in Kentucky. And Amy has an interesting problem because she has a NuTone NM200 like this, but it's got some major electronic damage and it most likely is not going to be repairable. So what I told her would be a good idea, and the easiest and most straightforward way to solve the problem, would be to buy a music and sound DMC1, which uses exactly the same circuit boards as a NuTone NM200, and swap out the boards from the DMC1 and put it onto the faceplate of her NuTone NM200, because she likes the look of the NuTone. It fits into her house better, and she doesn't really like the way the music and sound one looks, and who could blame her? She asked me, she got it in, and she asked me, she said, how do you take it apart? Because it doesn't seem obvious, and I don't know how to do that. So I told her, if you could hold on for a day or two, I'll make you a video. So what we're going to do in this video is we're going to disassemble the NuTone NM200, and then we're going to pretend that the boards came out of a DMC1, and I'm going to show you how to put it back together. Because it's not that difficult. There's a few little tricks, and you do have to be careful, of course, but it's not terrible. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to put a shop rag down, because you don't want to scratch up the faceplate of your master station when you go to take it apart, and you're going to be working on it. It's going to be scooting around, so you got to be kind of careful. You don't have to worry about too much what's on the back of the unit, because we're just going to disassemble it and then we're going to reassemble it. So the first thing we need to do is we need to take the tuner assembly off the back of the big heatsink. So let's go ahead and do that. So we're looking down at the back of the unit. This is the tuner assembly. It's got the label on it right here, and there's this flat flex cable right here, and this simply unplugs from the tuner. There's a little socket here it plugs into. Don't take it all the way out. You don't need to. You can just let it flop like this. It'll be fine. Of course, since there's going to be screws and things, you need a cup. You need something to put them in, because if you lose them, and I know you're going to, because everybody calls me, oh, I lost 3 of the screws, what do I do? Put them in the cup. That way you won't lose them. That's the only time I'm going to say that. Take the 4 screws out. The tuner assembly is held onto the heatsink with 4 machine screws, and they have little keeper washers on the screws themselves. We'll just unscrew these and put the screws where? In the cup, right? Just like I said. Okay, so we'll get those out, and then the tuner assembly comes loose. We'll put that off to the side. If you put it in a nice row as you take it apart, you'll know what order to put it back together in. Now the heatsink comes off, and put that out of the way, and we're down to the board. Now, the NM200 and the DMC1, there are 4 circuit boards. There's this board right on the back. There's the terminal board right here on the end. There's the main board, and then there's the display board. And you have to take them apart in that order. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take the terminal board off. Now, the terminal board and the power supply amplifier board, that's this one, they're held on to the board underneath it with these little weird plastic clip things, which I actually really hate. But I know they're quick and fast when you assemble something, and you'll get the benefit of that when you put it back together, but taking them apart is kind of a pain, because what you have to do is there are 2 little ears on each one, and when you push the board down, well, in fact, I'll tell you what, let me show you. So here's one of the little plastic keeper thingies, little spacers or standoffs. And you can see, if I hold it just right, it might actually focus. There are 2 little ears on it. And what happens is, when you take a board like this and you put it over the end of the keeper like that, and you push it down, it pops through. As it pops through, it compresses the ears so it pops through the opening, and then they spread back out, and now it's locked in place. So how do you take this apart? Well, you might think that you can squeeze it with like a pair of needle nose pliers, and perhaps if you're really coordinated, you can do that, but it's really kind of a pain in the neck. So what I like to use is I use a little nut driver like this, and this is a 9/64 inch nut driver, and it is exactly the right size to do this. And what you do is you place it over the end of the little standoff, you push down on it, and that compresses the ears, and then you can pull it out from the other side. Now, we're doing that on boards that are already assembled, so it's a little more awkward, but with a little bit of practice and a little bit of luck, you can get it apart. So what you have to do is, and this is going to be hard to do because I have to show it to you, is on the terminal board there are 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. And what tends to happen with these is when you compress them, you have to compress it and then push the board up this way with your finger to move it beyond it, and then you do the next one, and when you push this one up, it rocks the board, then it wants to snap back down on this one, and you end up going around a couple times. So it's kind of a pain. Another thing we have to do is there's this black ground wire here on it with a spade lug on it, and we need to unplug that because it ties it into the amplifier board. Now we can take it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do this one first on the corner, and I'm just going to put the nut driver over it and try to do it in a way that you can see. Push down and then push up on the board. It's easier to do when I'm not making a video, but you'll get the idea. So there's 2, and then we've got to do this one down here. And that's 3. And see, when I did this one and I pulled this corner up, it rocked this corner back down and it snapped back on. So now we're going to have to go do that one again. And we'll do this 4th one down here next. And if you think I'm struggling with it, I am, because it's hard enough to do when you're not making a video, and it's even harder to do when you are. Now, it fell right out. So that's good. Usually it doesn't actually just fall off the other board. One of the things you have to be really careful on this is if we flip this over, there are these long 2 rows of long pins. And these pins are about 3/4 of an inch long, and there's 2 rows, and I don't remember exactly how many there are. There's a whole bunch of them. And they fit into these holes here on the board. So when you pull this apart, you have to pull it up as straight and even as you can, because if you bend these pins and they're not aligned correctly anymore, trying to get them back into the little holes is a real pain in the neck. And then you have to take little pliers and you have to try to straighten them and even them all out. Otherwise, getting them in the hole is tricky. So you have to be careful when you do that. Also, when you put this down, because you're going to put it aside now because you're done with it, put it with the pins sticking up. Don't lay it down on the pins because you might bend them and then you got to straighten them out. So that's a pain in the neck. So put that over there. And that's the first board that comes out. The next board that comes out is the power supply amplifier board, and it has a total of 6 of the little standoffs. There's 3 across this side and 3 across the bottom, and it's pretty much the same thing. The way I've figured out that's the easiest to do this is I take another nut driver, which is a little smaller, and I put it down between the 2 boards, prying just a little bit. And when I say I'm prying just a little bit, I really mean just a little bit. You don't want to wrench on the thing because you could crack or damage one of the 2 boards. You know, you're prying up against this board and you're prying against the board that's below it, and you don't want to break it or scratch it or damage it or gouge it. So you have to be a little bit careful, but it's a little bit easier. So again, we'll put the 1 nut driver over the end of the spacer, push it down. You heard it go click. In another video, that's what I called the click of success. So we'll see how successful we are. So we've got that one out, and now we'll do this one. Push it down, pry it up a little bit, and then we'll do the one on the corner. And we got one side disconnected. Now, down in this board, in this area, is another set of pins like these. So you can't pry the board all the way down like this because you're going to curve and bend all the pins, and then you're in trouble. So you only can do it a little bit, and then we'll flip it over, and we'll start at this end, and we'll push and pry, and push and pry, and push, push, and pry. Now they're all out. And we actually did good because none of them snapped back on. So now the amplifier power supply board is loose. And here's the row of pins, just like on the terminal board right here. See all the pins? And again, you don't want to bend these. These go into the holes here. Oh, you can't see that. They go into the holes here. So again, we're going to put this aside, but we're going to put it pins up because we don't want to bend the pins. Now, that's actually the hardest part of the whole thing. Let's go ahead and flip this around the right way and get set up, and we're going to take the main board out. All right, so let's take the main board out. The main board is held in with screws, which makes it a little bit easier, but there's still some tricky parts. So one of the things you have to do is there's this pair of red and black wires that are twisted together. They come off the main board, they go around, and they plug into the terminals on the speaker cone right here, right here. So these just unplug. They are different sizes, as are the spade lugs on the speaker, so you can't really plug them in wrong unless you try really hard, and even then I'm not sure how you would do that. And now all we have to do is take out the 6 screws, and of course, where are we going to do with the screws? We're going to put them in the cup. These are self-tapping screws. They just screw into the standoffs on the faceplate. This one has this green support strap wire, and it goes down onto this corner right here, so we'll just leave that flopping around for the time being. And we'll take the rest of the screws out. And where do they go? In the cup. Now this board will lift off, and what you'll find is, oh, there's also this connection right here. So right here is the microphone board for the master station, and there's this little plug-in connector with a yellow, red, and black wire, and that just unplugs from the board. All right, so we'll flip this over, and what you'll see on this board is this is a socket assembly here, and it plugs into this other half of the socket on the display board. So when you plug it back together, you have to line those back up. The other thing that's tricky on this is the board that has all of the room control switches on them that you see when you open the door on the master station. These sometimes will stay stuck to the slide switches like these do, or sometimes when you lift this board off, it's like dominoes, and they all fall off everywhere, and then you have to stick them all back on, and then when you go to reassemble, you have to try to turn it over and get them through all the little slots and line them up correctly without them all falling off, and that sometimes is way trickier than you would ever think. The other thing which came off on this one is this little button cap right here. This fits into this slot on the faceplate, and that's the button for the privacy button on the master station. So don't lose that. You'll need that. We're going to take it off and put it in the cup for right now. So if you didn't lose any of these, you're good. If they didn't fall off, even better. If they did fall off, put them back on now so you don't lose any of them on the floor. Once you put that off to the side, we're down to the last board. This is the display board, and it's held onto the faceplate with 4 screws. And we'll take these out. And the display board just lifts out of the unit. Now, when you lift it out, 9 times out of 10, these little button caps will be stuck onto the little button switches that are soldered to the board. If they are, that's fine. Don't worry about it. It's actually easier in some respect. If these don't stay on the switches, and when you lift the board out, you find that they're like that, Then when you go put the board back in, you have to line up the little square openings in the ends of the buttons onto the little blue posts of the switch. I don't recommend that. It's a little tricky to do, so it's actually easier, while it's maybe not that much less tricky to do it this way. I prefer to take them and put them back on like this and get them all lined up where you can actually see that they're all in place, because it's going to be easier when you put the board back. The other thing you have to watch out for is that these are the two intercom buttons here, the door talk and inside talk and listen buttons. These just come out. They're not held in any way. They're actually held in place with the stems of the two switches on the main board, but that's not until you put this board back down. The other thing on this is you have this sort of foam rubbery gasket thing which sometimes just falls out, and this goes in the top of the faceplate above the display to block the light from coming out or something. I don't know why exactly, but that's the way they make it. So that needs to be in there like that. So that's how you disassemble your NM200. Now we're going to reassemble it, because Amy needs to know how to put it back together. Or maybe we shouldn't tell Amy. Maybe we should just cut the video off at this point and leave it up to her to figure out. No, that'd be kind of mean. Through the magic of having an imagination, we're now going to pretend that all of these boards that we have lying around on the workbench are the brand new boards that came out of Amy's DMC1 that she bought from someplace, and we're going to do a circuit board transplant into her NM200 and bring it back to life. This is the display board. It's the first board that goes in. The button caps are already in place. Now in Amy's case, she's going to have to change the DMC1 button caps for the NM200 button caps, because they're a different color and they're a different shape. And of course the NuTone ones are better than the DMC ones because it's a music and sound, so what are you going to do? The other thing you have to do is, this is the backlit LCD screen, and this is made out of glass. And the other thing that happens when you take this apart is you can easily get fingerprints on it like this. And then when you put it all back together and you turn it on, you're going to see the fingerprints light up too. And you don't want that, and you can't clean it after you put it on, because on the display there's a clear plastic piece right here that covers it up. So if you got fingerprints from your grubby fingers, then you have to take some Windex or something and clean it carefully to make sure you get all the fingerprints off of it. Once you are ready to do that, we're going to put this in first. Now if you just flop this upside down, guess what's going to happen? All these button caps are going to fall off, and then you're going to be unhappy. So we're going to tip this up a little bit, and we're going to tip this into it a little bit and line it up and drop it in place. Once you have it sitting there, now we're going to go back to what? Our cup with our screws in it, right? Remember, we put all the screws in a cup because that way we wouldn't lose them. Remember we talked about losing things? Nobody listens. Everybody calls me and they say, I watched your video and I did it exactly like you said, and I lost 3 of the screws. And how is that my problem? Anyway, I'm going to put the 4 screws back in, 1 in each corner. You only have to snug them up. You don't have to wrench on them. It's just a little intercom system. It's going to be fine. Alright, so once you put the display board back in and you've snugged down your screws, the thing I like to do to make sure that you're going to be okay is you're going to turn it over and you're going to push the buttons. And you're going to make sure that when you push them, they all go click, because that way you know they're all lined up correctly. Now, of course, when you do that, these 2, which are not really held in place, fall back, and now they're not sticking through the hole. So when you lay it back down, you get a little screwdriver and you wiggle them around, and then you check to make sure they're sticking back through the opening like they're supposed to, which they are. Now what we're going to do is we're going to put our main board back on, and before we do that, we have to put our privacy button cap back in the slot right here. Otherwise, you're going to have to take it all apart and do it again. To do this, it's relatively easy. Remember, you want to be careful because you don't want all these to fall out like in a Jenga game. How about that? So what I like to do, and again, this is always easier to do if you're not making a video, is just lay it down like that, and you have to line up. Remember the 2 sockets on the two boards? you have to line those up and you have to push them together because they just don't fit together on their own. You got to give it a little push. It's pretty easy to do, and unless you lose all the button caps, you'll be all right. So now what we're going to do is we're going to put 3 of the 6 screws back in to start. And you might be wondering why. Well, because I think that's the best way to do it. Okay, so we put 3 of the screws in. That holds the board down nicely. And then we're going to flip it over, and we're going to make sure that these move back and forth and spring and pop back out freely, and they go click when you push them, and that proves that the button caps are stuck onto the stems of the switches correctly and they're not all bound up and they don't stick, because if they stick, guess what? Then you got to take it all apart and you got to do it again. So it's better to do it right the first time. So now we'll put the other 3 screws in. 1, wrong screw. Remember, the screws that go into the plastic face plates are self-tapping screws, and the screws that hold the tuner assembly on are machine screws. Ah, look, even I made a mistake. We forgot to put our green support strap back on. Where does it go? On this corner down here. And it's easy to tell because it's bent so it fits that way. So we'll just take this back out and put it back on now. If you didn't notice that and you left it flopping around, then you would put the terminal board back on, and then the screwdriver can't get to the screw, and then you got to take the terminal board back off and then fix it and then put it back. So let's not do that. The other thing we have to do is we have to plug our little yellow, red, and black connector from the microphone board back into the little sock, into the little pin down there, into the connector. Plug that in like that. And we're going to take our red and black speaker wires, wrap it around the speaker, and plug on the small connector onto the small terminal, and the big connector on, the big connector. How about that? Now, this is done. The next thing we have to do is we have to put our amplifier board back on. Remember the amplifier board? The one with all the pins on the bottom that you have to be careful and not bend? Okay, so the way you do this is the pins get priority before anything else. So what you do is you tip this up and you eyeball the pins into their little holes carefully and make sure they all slide in even, and they're very long, which is good because that makes it a little easier. And once you get it lined up correctly, this is where the little tabs on the standoffs pay off for ease of assembly. You just push down and it snaps in place, just like that. See how easy that is? That's the same thing that some person did at the factory when they built this thing, and it was quick and easy. Once that's in place, we're going to put our terminal board back on. Remember, it has pins too, and we're going to do exactly the same thing. We're going to line up these pins with these holes right here. Same way, just wiggle it around till you get them all lined up carefully. Don't force it. If you force it, you will bend them, and then you have to straighten them out, and it becomes way, way harder. Once you get it in place, guess what you do? You push down, and it snaps in place, and that's it. Now we're going to take our ground wire with the lug on it, and we're going to plug it back onto the ground terminal, and we're almost done. We have the tuner left to do, so we're going to put our heat sink back on this part of the heat sink that's on the board, and this only fits one way. If you try to put it backwards, it's the wrong shape. It doesn't line up. It only goes one way, like that. Line up the holes. We take our tuner assembly, and what we're going to do is we're going to get one screw on the screwdriver. Oh, it's a magnetized screwdriver because that makes life easier. And we'll get one of them started. And we'll just snug it down a little bit, and then we'll get our other screws. And see, the little washers want to fall off in the cup, so make sure you put the washers back on, because everybody knows that the tuner assembly screwed to the back of the big aluminum heatsink securely inside the wall of your house is probably a high stress application, and without the washers, who knows what's going to go wrong. Screws could come loose, things could flop around, there could be sparks, there could be smoke, possibly flames, which will be followed by running and screaming, and it's not good. And all of that could happen because somebody didn't put a 1-cent washer on a screw. You know what they say, safety first. Alright, once you get the 4 of them started, just snug them down. You don't have to make them real tight because the washers are doing all the work. Alright, the very last thing we have to do is we have to take our flat flex cable and we have to plug it into the socket right here on the side of the tuner module. Like this, you just line it up and plug it in nice and straight like that, and that's it. Our NuTone NM200 with its transplanted substandard, but they'll do in a pinch, DMC1 boards is now complete and ready to go. Of course, what you should do at this point, if this is your own set or Amy can do it with her set, is if you have a spare transformer for one of these, it would be a good idea to plug it in and make sure it all works before you put it back in the wall. So that's pretty much all there is to it. That's how you disassemble a NuTone NM200 and then reassemble it with donor boards from a questionable but okay music and sound DMC1. I hope this helps Amy out and she'll be able to get her system back up and running again. I hope you found this interesting and perhaps it'll be helpful. If it is, give it a thumbs up on YouTube because that always helps. There'll be a banner right here that shows you how to subscribe. Go to our YouTube homepage, click on the bell, and when you click on the bell, click on it to receive all notifications, and every time we post a new video, you'll get a notification and you can watch it. That's all for today. See you on the next video.